Please note, rewards offered are subject to change or expire. To the author's knowledge, reward amounts are current and valid as of this episode's air date and may be subject to terms and conditions. Please confirm all reward details with the relevant case authority listed in the show notes. Welcome to Reward Offered, where we take deep dives into unsolved Australian cases with financial rewards. Our next case is the death of Jason Barry Guise in the Bayside suburbs of Brisbane in April 2019. Jason's body would be found inside a treatment tank well by maintenance workers, although exactly how his body came to be in there is still to be conclusively determined. Information examined at a coronial inquest in 2021 shone a light on several individuals to try and establish who, if anyone among them, had been present at the time of Jason's death. We'll lay out all the available evidence and take you through Coroner Donald Mackenzie's findings to examine everything we know about Jason's case. There is currently a $250,000 reward offered for information which leads to the apprehension and conviction of the person or persons responsible for the death of Jason Guise. There is also an indemnity from prosecution on offer for any accomplice who did not directly cause the death of Jason. If you have any information pertaining to the death of Jason Guise, please call Crime Stoppers on 1800 333 000. You can remain entirely anonymous and still claim the reward. I'm your host Amanda. Let's dive in. If any of the details of this case cause you distress, please reach out to Lifeline on 13 11 14 in Australia or a relevant crisis support service in your local area. Jason Barry Guise was born on the 18th of October 1973 in Parkes, New South Wales. His parents Barry Guise and Peggy Kelly separated not long after he was born, with Jason and his elder sister Nicole being raised by their mum. As a teen, Jason started partaking in illicit substances, reportedly using marijuana and amphetamines on a recreational basis. As his age increased, so did his usage. By the time he relocated to Queensland in around 2015, it's believed he was fully in the throes of addiction. At the time of his death, Jason was using methamphetamine on a regular basis, reportedly having admitted to his sister that he injected the drug and at one point was having 5 or 6 shots a day. Miss Rachel, we're starting off good, Theoharudis, who was a former partner of Jason's, characterised his drug tolerance as high and claimed that he had taken 36 points of methamphetamine before he went into custody on the 7th of April 2018. Now, not to advertise how vanilla I am, but I did have to look up what a point of methamphetamine was, and according to the National Drug and Alcohol Research Centre at the University of New South Wales, 1 point equates to 0.1 grams of the drug when it's in the form of base or ice, or half a gram of the lower purity powder, which is taken once or twice over the course of an evening or day. So if Rachel's depiction of Jason's use pre-custody is accurate, that seems to be an incredibly high consumption for a single day. Now, of course, somebody being a drug user has zero impact on their deservedness of justice if they've been killed. And I don't share those usage details to sensationalise his addiction. His level of use and tolerance will be a crucial consideration as we weigh up his possible causes of death later on. We're going to consider Jason's criminal history for the same reason as his drug usage, because elements of such have been nominated as a possible motive and will form part of our considerations later. Jason's criminal history in Queensland is described as lengthy and as having begun in 2012. His offences were mainly drug and property crimes, and his most serious convictions are listed as having been unlawful use of a motor vehicle with intent to deprive, burglary, and stealing and receiving tainted property which led to multiple appearances in magistrates' courts. On the 5th of April 2018, while under the influence of methamphetamine, Jason grabbed his then-partner Rachel around the throat and proceeded to choke her, although this didn't result in her losing consciousness. Not that that makes it any better, but it was included, so. After 334 days in pre-sentence custody, on the 7th of March 2019, Jason pleaded guilty to 1 count of choking in a domestic setting and the offence of contravening a domestic violence order. He was sentenced to 2 years with an immediate release on parole. This was his most recent conviction prior to his death. Upon release, Jason moved in with a friend, Peter Kelly, at Unit 10, 33 Bride Street, Wynnum. He was unemployed and used a bicycle to get around, with Wynnum and the Bayside areas reportedly being where he spent the majority of his time. Associates who gave evidence at the inquest admitted to supplying Jason with drugs and being in his presence during the use of cannabis and/or intravenous methamphetamine. Coroner Mackenzie kindly supplies us with a timeline of significant events in his findings, so let's run through that first. I'll also put a map of the area up on our socials and mark all the important points so that you can see where things are in relation to each other. It'll probably make the whole timeline just a little bit easier to understand if you're looking at the map when we get to the movements in a little bit. 7th of March, 2019. Jason is sentenced and released on immediate parole. 16th of April, 2019. 10:15 a.m. Jason attends the Wynnum Plaza and purchases a mobile phone. 17th of April, 2019. 12:33 p.m. Jason makes his last ATM withdrawal from the Bank of Queensland at Wynnum. His housemate Peter Kelly is with him. This day is also his last contact with probation and parole, with his parole history being noted as unremarkable. 20th of April, 2019. Jason calls his father to wish him happy birthday. This would be the last time Barry would speak to his son. 21st of April, 2019. Easter Sunday. D-Day. Jason is reportedly seen by his housemate, Peter Kelly, in the morning. It's stated either at home or in passing. And I don't really understand this having either and or in the statement, like, did he see him at home or in passing? Does he not know in what context he saw Jason, or is it just presented poorly? Either way, this seems to be in reference to very early that Sunday morning, as in like the hours just after 12 midnight. 4:27 a.m. Jason's phone makes a 000 call. However, it doesn't register in their system as it doesn't actually connect to the Emergency Services Answer Point, or ESAP. I assume this is due to the call being ended immediately. 12:21 p.m. Jason enters the Wynnum 7-Eleven with Shane Johnson. I'm going to read the next 3 timestamps as the coroner has written them, and then we're going to talk about them. Oh, and get your maps out, kids. 2:34 p.m. Jason is seen filling Shane's red Holden Commodore, license 573 Yankee Whiskey Alpha, with petrol. No one else is seen in the vehicle. 3 minutes later, at 2:37 p.m., Jason drives the car to the 7-Eleven car park on the Edith Street side. 4 minutes later, at 2:41 p.m., Jason enters the 7-Eleven. It may be because they didn't know where he went or what he did, but in that 3 minutes between 2:34 and 2:37, Jason goes somewhere else off camera. When I watch the footage, which I'll put in our socials too, I see him pull up, and after he finishes filling the tank, he walks off diagonally to his left, across the front of the car at like roughly a 45-degree angle. And if you look at the street view, it looks like he's headed in the general direction of the Coles building next door. He certainly doesn't look like he's headed to the 7-Eleven entry, which is basically directly forward in front of the car. Like the car's nose is pointed at the entry. Then in the released footage, it cuts to him entering the 7-Eleven, but he's coming from the hard right across the front of the building, again from the Coles direction, not from the left, which is the Edith Street side where he's apparently parked before entering, per the coroner's description. It's quite a tight security shot on the door. You can really only see maybe about a metre inside the door. You can see the end of an aisle to the right and the counter to the left, but not behind it. And you can see the car park spaces across the front of the building out through the door and glass walls. Now, initially I thought he might have been going to the Coles building to maybe go to an ATM to get cash out, only because he walks into the 7-Eleven with something in his right hand, though we initially can't see what. But it can't be that because we're told that the last time he visited an ATM was on the 17th. So I don't know where he went, but anyway, he walks in and he walks out of frame to the bottom right corner. Then he comes back into frame, and we can't see any timestamps, but the same customer is still being served, so I assume it's almost instant, although there is a very clear cut in the footage. While that customer is still being served, he walks back up to the front door, which sets off the sensor, and it slides open to the right. But he doesn't walk out, he just turns back around, and as he does, you can see that it's actually cash in his hand. Once the previous customer's finished, he walks up, hands over the cash, I think it's a 50, and just walks out immediately. But he doesn't walk left towards the Edith Street side. Nor does he walk in the direction of the car. He once again goes hard right across the front of the building as though he's going back towards the Coles car park next door. The footage then cuts to him walking back to Johnson's car at the Bowser from the same 45-degree Coles angle that he took when he first finished filling up. Wherever it is he went, I think he went back there before he returned to the car. So I don't know what's going on, but the description from the coroner across those 3 timestamps, as far as I can see, doesn't match the footage at all. And I don't think this necessarily means a whole lot with regard to Jason's death, but I don't know, I guess it's just odd to me that the footage and the coroner's description are so incongruent. Anyway, back to the timeline. We now jump to 5:50 p.m. Jason drives Shane Johnson's red Commodore back into the same 7-Eleven and parks on the western side, which is the Coles side. 6:27 p.m, so this is 37 minutes in the car park now. Johnson uses Jason's phone to call 000. The call is disconnected prior to being answered by an operator, and according to Johnson, Jason leaves the 7-Eleven to avoid police, which seems totally plausible given he's on parole and high on methamphetamine. It's no wonder the guy gets out of Dodge. 6:29 p.m, so this is 2 minutes later. QPS Communications attempts to call Jason's phone, but there's no answer. Because no one answers this call, and given the prior 000 call disconnection, a QPS job is created to conduct a welfare check on Jason. Remember, the welfare check is generated for him because it's his phone the call came from, not because he made the call. But this will actually end up being somewhat useful to the investigation, but we'll get to that soon. 6:38 p.m. Jason is seen walking through the Woolworths car park 1 block west, carrying a mobile phone, side bag, and a bottle of soft drink. This footage will also be on our socials. The location where Jason is seen in the footage is a 2-minute walk from the 7-Eleven. So he didn't, run off when Johnson calls 000, he just seems to have left about 8 or 9 minutes later. 6:41 p.m. A white Ford Ranger, license 631 X-Ray Delta X-Ray, belonging to Janine Hudson, enters the 7-Eleven forecourt and Jason's housemate, Peter Kelly, exits the vehicle from the passenger side before it drives off. Johnson reportedly tells Kelly that Jason had just left him there at the 7-Eleven. 6:47 p.m. Johnson now uses his own mobile phone to once again call 000. He reports that someone or something is in the boot of his car, and he wants police present when he opens the boot in case something jumps out. I probably don't need to state this, but Johnson is evidently experiencing paranoia. 7:00 p.m. Jason attends the Rosie's food van located in Charlotte Street, Wynnum, and collects takeaway food parcels. 7:07 p.m. The last incoming call from Jason to Kelly, with Jason reportedly informing Kelly that he is at Rosie's. 7:19 p.m. Jason is seen on CCTV on the eastern side of Berrima Street, Wynnum, from the direction of Bay Street. He appears to be carrying a plastic bag, I assume that's the food, and pushing his bike. He is reported to be wearing a helmet, blue t-shirt, black shorts, and running shoes. He is seen entering the driveway of 96 Berrima Street, the address Brian Elwell lived with his mother. Jason appears to approach a person, stays for approximately a minute, and then leaves. Now, despite this case being unsolved, a couple of fortuitous things do occur throughout regardless, one of which is that property where Jason visits Elwell is across the street from a hotel. So that explains why we have such good descriptions of things at this point, although the footage from the hotel hasn't been amongst the footage released, which I find interesting. 7:22 p.m. Jason rides his bike eastbound on Bay Terrace at the intersection with Berrima Street. This is the last independent sighting of Jason. 7:46 p.m. The mobile number, it lists it, but I'm not going to say it because some other poor bugger probably has it by now and some Looney Tune out there will call it or text it. But anyway, the number used by Jason was last recorded by MobileNet from the Wynnum North Tower, located at the corner of Mungala Street and Tingle in Wynnum North. The mobile service indicated that Jason's phone was in the vicinity of Waterloo Esplanade, Wynnum. 7:52 p.m. Police attend the home of Jason and Kelly at 1033 Bride Street, Wynnum, for the purposes of conducting a welfare check. Remember, a job had been created after the return call from 000 to Jason's phone wasn't answered after Johnson used it earlier in the night to call 000. Police report the unit as being in darkness and there being no visible disturbances. They note nothing out the front of the unit, nor specifically notice a bike. This is actually the second fortuitous event in the case, because if Johnson had made that 000 call from his own phone too, police never would have been present at Jason's unit at 7:52 conducting the welfare check, and in turn able to make observations about the unit. 7:58 p.m. The coroner's timeline lists QPS constables Boffo and Sullivan attending the Wynnum 7-Eleven in response to Johnson's 6:27 000 call. Not that I can see it makes any difference, but I think that time is a typo. I think the coroner means in response to Johnson's 6:47 phone call, because they didn't talk to anyone in regard to the 6:27 call. So unless they traced the call, which I don't even know if you could do that in that amount of time, they wouldn't have known where that call was coming from. Police note that there was no person or animal found in the boot of Johnson's car and that he was paranoid that someone was out to get him. 10:04 p.m. Kelly calls Jason. No answer. The call duration is 2 seconds. 10:05 p.m. Kelly calls Jason a second time. No answer. Call duration is 3 seconds. 10:30 p.m. approximately. Kelly advises he returns home but Jason isn't there. He reports finding a food parcel on the chair outside the front door and that the bike Jason had been riding was at the bottom of the stairs leaning against the back wall of Unit 5. The next day, Monday 22nd of April at 1:13 a.m. Johnson is driven from the Wynnum 7-Eleven to Evolution Apartments in Tank Street in Brisbane City. And yes, this is implying that Johnson has just been sitting in a 7-Eleven car park for almost 7 hours. 1:55 a.m. Johnson is caught on CCTV in the Evolution Apartments elevator. He is alone. So those are the main timestamps of the evening as per the timeline and the coroner's findings. But obviously the story continues. Kelly tells police that he returned home that night at about 10:30 p.m. He says he finds the food from Rosie's on the front porch and reports finding the bike Jason was seen on CCTV using, left unsecured in the backyard. He says this is unusual. On that next day, Monday the 22nd, Kelly attempts to call Jason as he hasn't returned to the unit. When Jason doesn't answer, Kelly rings some other associates to try and locate him, but says Lee Lucas nor Shane Johnson had seen or heard from Jason either. 4 days later, on Friday the 26th of April, Kelly attends the same Rosie's food van referenced earlier and reports Jason's absence to the police liaison officer, Miss Jacqueline Carter. Miss Carter tells Kelly to contact Jason's family to confirm if they've heard from him, and in the meantime, she'll check to see if perhaps Jason had been returned to custody and if that was possibly why he'd been out of contact. 3 days later, on the 29th of April, Jason's sister Nicole contacts Kelly. By this time, she's grown gravely concerned about her brother, as the two would speak regularly by phone, and the last time she'd heard from him was Easter Sunday on April 21st, though it doesn't tell us what time. Kelly reportedly reveals that he hasn't seen Jason in over a week, and Nicole then tells Kelly to contact the police and report Jason as a missing person. What I'd love to know here is the 29th the first time that Kelly and Nicole speak? Because if it is, that means that Kelly didn't reach out to Jason's family on the 26th when asked to do so by Miss Carter at the Rosie's food van. And if he didn't, why didn't he? Queensland Police would confirm that the 21st of April was the last day that anyone was known to have had contact with Jason, and that his bank accounts, mobile phone, nor social media had been utilised since that date. I'm going to read a segment of the findings here, and then we'll talk about it. Quote, Mr. Kelly gave evidence at the inquest that he simply thought Mr. Guise could have been in custody as a result of the parole violations. That was why he was not overly worried about Mr. Guise being missing and why he asked the police liaison officer to check if Mr. Guise was in custody. Evidence given at this inquest by some others who were close to Mr. Guise similarly were not concerned when he didn't answer or return their phone calls or messages. It was not unusual for Mr. Guise to consume drugs and be uncontactable for about a week. Unquote. Okay, so this could be purely semantics in his findings, but Coroner Mackenzie just implied that it was Miss Carter who suggested checking if the reason for Jason's absence is him having been taken into custody. If it was in fact Miss Carter's idea and not Kelly's to check this, there's at least the possibility that Kelly is now simply using this as an excuse to explain away his inaction after the fact. Did her saying and doing that supply him with that idea? Much like if you've seen the Chris Watts interview where Colorado Bureau of Investigation agent Tammy Lee strategically, brilliantly, suggests to Chris the narrative of Shannon having killed the girls and then him having killed her in the aftermath. And you can see Chris take the bait and then just pivot his story about how that whole evening unfolded. So is Kelly doing the same thing? Is he using this story of how the interaction with Miss Carter unfolded to utilise what he now sees as a much better excuse to explain away or justify his inaction? So it would be interesting to know if Miss Carter could recall just whose idea it was, to check if Jason was in custody. Coroner Mackenzie indicates that it was only after his discussion with Jason's sister on the 29th that Kelly tried to report Jason as a missing person. And I said tried because according to Kelly, QPS wouldn't accept the report because he wasn't a next of kin. There's no indication in the findings as to whether anyone was able to establish if this claim from Kelly was true, but honestly, I find it kind of hard to believe. Maybe if this was back in the 90s, even 2000s, maybe, but police needing it to be a next of kin in 2019, I don't know. Does anyone know if this is a thing in Queensland policing? And here's why this suggestion makes even less sense to me. QPS refused to generate a missing persons report for a man who, in just the last 7 days, they have A, been unable to locate for the purposes of a welfare check after a disconnected 000 call, and B, whose whereabouts have seemingly been queried by a police liaison officer. Unless the connection of those all being the same guy was never made, I find the refusal difficult to buy. I'd be curious if there was any proof of this attempt at reporting by Kelly, or if we're just going by his word on this one. Devil's advocate though, Coroner Mackenzie does go on to say that when Nicole tried to report Jason missing, that she too was unable to file a report because she lived interstate. So who knows, maybe no one wanted to do the paperwork. But in any case, Kelly attributes this series of events as being the reason why he didn't report Jason missing until 10 days after anyone had last laid eyes on him. It's reported that on Wednesday, May 1st, Kelly begins packing up Jason's belongings, his reason being that his housemate just hadn't returned to the unit. He finds a bum bag containing Jason's wallet with all his cards reportedly in situ, some loose change and a box cutting knife. It's the following day, on the 2nd of May, that Kelly reports Jason missing. That same day, an investigation into Jason's whereabouts was commenced by the Queensland Police Missing Persons Unit. All inquiries undertaken by investigators were unable to locate Jason, and on the 5th of May, a joint investigation between the Homicide Investigation Unit and the Bayside Criminal Investigation Branch began. It was designated Operation Romeo Kickoff. 3 days later, at approximately 12:10 p.m. on Wednesday the 8th of May 2019, Jason was located. Workers attending the Queensland Urban Utilities Waste Treatment Pump Station located at the corner of Granada and Adam Streets, Wynnum, discovered Jason's decomposing body inside a treatment tank well. The employees were from Viola Water Services, which was contracted by Queensland Urban Utilities, and were attending the pump station to undertake routine maintenance and cleaning of the wet well. The wet wells themselves were enclosed by a chain-link barbed wire fence and a gate which was secured with a padlock. The crew's truck was reversed up to the wet well designated SP33. The well is described as having a hinged, square aluminium cover measuring 1.5 metres by 1 metre on the top. This cover reportedly weighed approximately 20 kilograms and had 2 lockable handles. These handles were described as being closed over the lid but not having padlocks secured on either of them. Once the lid was opened, located inside was a stainless steel mesh cage, which served as fall protection in the event a worker tripped or to catch items accidentally dropped into the well, which is described as being about 5 metres deep. The mesh cage had one hole that measured 20 centimetres by 20 centimetres, allowing enough room to fit a hose without requiring the removal of the whole cage. An important element here that I haven't seen evidenced in the findings is what was the process to remove this cage? What level of difficulty and time window was involved in removing and reinstalling the cage itself? And did it require having any specific tools? This consideration will be important a little bit later when we're weighing up the possibilities of how it is that Jason came to be inside the well. The workers opened the lid and upon peering in, observed what appeared to be a mannequin. It's never a mannequin, floating face down on the surface of the water about 3 metres beneath the opening. They initially suspected it was a first aid mannequin and continued about their work, lowering a hose and draining the well of about 8,000 litres of water. Once all the liquid had been removed, Joel, I'm not including the poor guy's surname, was lowered into the well for the purposes of removing any obstructions and cleaning it. As he draws nearer the would-be mannequin, he observes it's wearing a t-shirt and one running shoe. As per the coroner's findings, Joel then, horrifically, notices a scrotum, veins on the body, fingernails, ankle socks, a purple bracelet, and to top off this horror scene, maggots coming out of a hole in the buttocks. After lifting the sleeve of the shirt and seeing a tattoo on the arm, the now panicked Joel is finally pulled out of the hellhole by his co-workers. The men contact their supervisors, who in turn notify police. The following day, May 9th, Dr. Beng Ong performs a post-mortem on Jason's body. Decomposition is described as being fairly advanced and having resulted in partial disintegration of the soft tissue. There was additional adipocere formation, an event also known as saponification, which occurs after death and whereby chemical changes within the body, such as hydrolysis and hydrogenation, convert body fat into adipocere, which is also referred to as corpse wax. The adipocere is a product of decomposition and tends to occur when the body fat is exposed to anaerobic bacteria in a warm, damp, alkaline environment which may occur in soil or water. Adipocere itself actually acts as a preservative and can persist for hundreds of years after death, with some defining it as a process of mummification. The result of the chemical changes is a white, greasy, waxy substance that actually does give the body an unreal mannequin-like appearance. So while it's never a mannequin, it might genuinely look like one. Dr. Ong performed a superficial dissection. He found no obvious injuries on the body apart from an old injury to the nose, and noted no injuries to the skeleton itself. The internal organs, however, had reportedly disintegrated to the extent that no proper assessment of such could be made. Dr. Ong found no pathological changes indicative of a cause of death, nor any which could be considered as having contributed to the death. Toxicology samples of Jason's liver and bile found methamphetamine and its metabolite amphetamine within the liver. These levels are indicated as having been within the known toxic range. It's important to note, though, that the toxic ranges available in literature upon which these comparisons were made are all derived from analyses of fresh liver specimens, and postmortem drug concentrations do not necessarily reflect concentrations at the time of death. Postmortem interval, environment, sampling site, volume of distribution, redistribution to body cavities, and degradation after death may all affect the concentrations within the body. These variations are called postmortem redistribution, or PMR. The redistribution of drugs primarily occurs in the first postmortem hours, prior to the stage of putrefaction. At the conclusion of the postmortem, Dr. Ong was unable to ascertain a cause of death. He noted that while it was possible death could have been due to methamphetamine toxicity, this couldn't be confirmed due to the previously mentioned postmortem changes. An anomaly I noticed with the description of these findings is it's reported that there was no obvious injuries on the body apart from the old injury to the nose. But what about the buttocks seen by poor Joel in the hell well? It isn't mentioned at all, so I don't know if it's explained away as being merely due to insect impact on the body, or why he doesn't mention it at all. Coroner Mackenzie describes the investigation undertaken by QPS as exhaustive and notes they produced a detailed report for his consideration, analysing the material facts and circumstances of Jason's death. Thousands of pages of statements and technical reports, hundreds of hours of CCTV footage, electronically recorded interviews and telephone recordings were included in the brief of evidence for Coroner Mackenzie's consideration. Despite their exhaustive investigation, police had been unable to determine when Jason died, if anyone else was involved in his death and/or disposal of his body, or if an offence of unlawful killing had even occurred. On the 21st of February 2021, in an attempt to prompt individuals with information to come forward, Queensland Police announced a reward of $250,000 and an appropriate indemnity from prosecution for any accomplice. That same month saw a renewed missing persons campaign released to Australian media, but no new leads came to light. I don't know why that would go out as a missing persons campaign, but anyway, it said that, so I read, I tell. The coronial inquest into the death of Jason Guise took place over 3 days on the 25th, 26th and 27th of October 2021. Given the nature of the coronial jurisdiction and investigations into a death or suspected death, under Section 45(2) of the Coroner's Act Queensland, a coroner must, after considering all the evidence presented, and where possible, find the following: who the deceased person is, how they died, when they died, where they died, in particular if that occurred in Queensland, and what caused the person to die. The focus of a coronial inquest is on discovering what happened, not ascribing guilt, attributing blame, or apportioning liability. The purpose of an inquest is to inform the family and the greater public of how a death occurred. Section 46 of the Coroner's Act authorises a coroner to make any preventative recommendations in their findings in relation to public health or safety, the administration of justice, or measures which they believe will result in prevention of similar deaths or a reduction in their likelihood. Coroner Mackenzie states that issues for him to deal with at this inquest were 1. Findings required by Section 45(2), being the identity of the deceased, when, where and how he died, and what caused his death. And 2. The identity of any persons involved in the death of Jason Barry Guise. Lead QPS investigator, Detective Brent Dadds, outlined the QPS investigation that had been undertaken, the various lines of inquiry and the theories that had emerged as a result. Detective Dadds reiterated the exclusion of suicide or accidental death from Jason inserting himself into SP33, given the noted difficulty in replacing the cover from within. It was also noticed that there was no gravel rash or abrasion-type injuries on Jason's body, which would be consistent with his body having entered a manhole entry point. There was also no scientific evidentiary indicators, such as DNA, obtained from the manhole. Police suspected that likely at least 2 people had engaged in the criminal offence of misconduct with a corpse, but were unable to explain the circumstances of the commission of that offence. Brian Elwell had met Jason while incarcerated at the Arthur Gorrie Correctional Centre in Darra, Queensland. Elwell admitted that upon Jason's release on parole, the two had been using intravenous drugs together. He claimed that one night the pair had been walking through Wynnum when they decided to cut down a laneway. He said they were looking at a car when a man came out of his house and pointed a rifle at them. Elwell claimed to have told a Mr. Bradley Cork as well as Kelly about this incident. It doesn't explain whether this was a random event or if he's implying that this man was known to Jason. It was Elwell's house at 96 Berrima Street, Wynnum, where CCTV had shown Jason dismounting his bicycle and approaching a person in the driveway before leaving a minute later. Elwell said he didn't remember having seen Jason that night, but confirms to the coroner that Jason didn't know anyone else at the unit block besides him. He conceded and accepted that if he was depicted on the footage, then it was him. Johnson, the 000 Stan, had nominated Elwell as having been involved in or having knowledge of Jason's death. He claimed Elwell had disclosed to him that Jason had disrespected his family and he hadn't wanted him returning to the property again. When asked about this, Elwell denied any falling out with Jason. Another witness who we'll speak more about shortly, Chantel Newbury, had told the court that on the day before Jason's funeral, she had seen a man who she was later told was Brian, having a secretive discussion with Kelly. Newbury claimed that Kelly had revealed to her that Brian had told him that it was Bear, who is Shane Johnson, that was the last person to see Jason alive, but that Kelly also believed that Johnson, quote, wouldn't have done it, unquote. Evidence from associates of Jason's referenced Elwell's intimidating nature. Newbury gave evidence of an interaction between Elwell and Kelly that was said to have occurred immediately after Elwell was informed Kelly would be attending the funeral. This interaction allegedly discussed police attention at the funeral, but was denied by Elwell, though accepted by Kelly. While Newbury said Elwell was non-aggressive, Mr. Kelly, on the other hand, described him as exhibiting full-on aggression and being very weird. Elwell denied any falling out with Jason, nor any involvement in his disappearance or death. Mr. Rawlings, who was counsel for Jason's family, described Elwell's involvement in the case as obscure in nature, but the coroner writes that Elwell's evidence at the inquest was indicative of an honest witness, forthcoming and replete with reasonable concessions on time and place of events. Nonetheless, the coroner accepts Rawlings' observations and noted the concerning evidence that Jason was last seen alive at 7:22 on a bike, but just 3 minutes earlier was caught on CCTV at Elwell's property. What there is no mention of, crucially, is when does that same CCTV next show Elwell leaving his property. Peter Kelly, who was Jason's housemate, also appeared as a witness. His behaviour at the time of Jason's disappearance is described as odd. At this point, the coroner seems to confirm that in the 10 days leading up to Kelly reporting Jason as missing, he in fact had not made any inquiries with Jason's family or associates despite not having seen or heard from him. Coroner Mackenzie finds that Kelly was the individual closest to Jason at the time of his death, and that while Kelly had justified his lack of concern to Jason's unknown whereabouts, also found his evidence nonetheless curious, including Kelly packing up Jason's belongings the day before reporting him missing. Another inquest witness who we'll speak of, Teresa Golding, claimed that while on a phone call with Jason on Easter weekend, she had heard Mr. Kelly's voice in the background of the call and believed the two men were arguing. It doesn't explain why this confusion, but Coroner Mackenzie notes that there appears to be an error in the dates, but that it seems this call occurred in the early hours of Easter Sunday on the 21st. What it doesn't mention is the time of this call. Surely that would be pretty easy to establish though. And while this can't tell us definitively who is in the background, we might be able to narrow down some options depending on the timestamp. While Kelly vaguely mentioned having seen Jason early that morning with no particular timestamp, remember that on the timeline supplied by Coroner Mackenzie, Jason's mobile made a 000 call at 4:27 a.m. on Easter Sunday that never connected. Now, that could have been Jason, but given we have no evidence of Jason making any other 000 calls that day, and Johnson confirmed as having made 2, at least one of which is from Jason's phone, while not conclusive, I think we can make a good guess that Johnson is with Jason at 4:27 a.m. and that there's a good chance it was him who most likely placed that call, not Jason. This is why the timing of Teresa's call is so important. While she claimed she thought it was Kelly in the background of the phone call, the coroner notes that she couldn't identify Kelly's voice when it was played to her at the inquest. But if the records of her call with Jason indicated having occurred anywhere in the vicinity of 4:27 a.m., I think it's reasonable to find that there is at least a good chance that if there was an argument in the background, that it could have been Johnson's voice she was hearing. And while we know that nothing happens to Jason until much later that day, it could possibly be evidence of tension between Johnson and Jason. But back to Kelly. Kelly recalled that when Jason's body was discovered in the wet well, he had had a hunch that it was him, and he'd ridden to the site to pay his respects. The coroner then notes that when it was put to him that the site was only 1.3 kilometres from the unit that he shared with Jason, Kelly had simply remarked to the court, "That far, was it?" Another inquest witness, Troy Peterson, who was a friend of Jason's, had previously reported to police that he believed Kelly was involved, or at least aware of what had happened to Jason. However, at inquest, Peterson now claimed to have resiled that belief. Kelly denied any involvement in Jason's death, though Coroner Mackenzie found his explanation for his delay in reporting Jason missing to be not particularly convincing. I've just realised that I'm a little stuffy, so I apologise for my voice. I'm just going to go have some Tabasco and see if that helps. I don't know why I'm all suddenly clogged up. I swear I wasn't clogged up like an hour ago. But anyway, apologies, but we're powering on. After being extensively cross-examined by Rawlings regarding the telecommunication data from his mobile phone service, the coroner found no fresh evidence had emerged which directly indicated Kelly to have been involved in Jason's death. In 2018, Brett Sneesby, I could go a sneeze, had also met Jason at the Arthur Gorrie Correctional Centre. He described the pair as friends and said that he didn't believe Jason had had any enemies on the inside. He did recall Jason angrily complaining about his Statesman vehicle and other belongings being stolen while he was in jail, and making noises about getting them back though. After his release, Sneesby said that he'd caught up with Jason several times, the last of which was on Good Friday. He denied any knowledge of the circumstances surrounding Jason's death. Another jailmate of Jason's, Lee Lucas, had met him around 2014 also in Arthur Gorrie. They had once again spent time together in prison in 2016, this time at Woodford Correctional Centre. He advised that although at the time he was trying to distance himself from the Wynnum drug scene, the last time he had seen Jason was at his partner Belinda Schwartz's house on Good Friday. He remembered Jason as having been in good spirits. Aaron Green had met Jason at Woodford Correctional Centre in 2016 and described them as close friends for about a month and a half. After his release in 2018, Green had gone to live with Jason and Jason's then-girlfriend Rachel Theoharudis. Green claimed that he never witnessed any domestic violence himself, but that at one point he'd returned after a couple of days away to find that Jason had been incarcerated over DV allegations. Green wasn't able to identify anyone he knew with animus towards Jason, nor Jason for them. Rachel Theoharudis had lived with Jason for approximately 2 years before their relationship ended abruptly when he was remanded in custody in April 2018 in relation to DV offences and having choked her. Rachel recalled Jason's extensive drug use and suggested an indebtedness to drug dealers. She described his propensity for violence under the influence of methamphetamine, stating, quote, "But when he's on the ice, he attacks everyone. Doesn't matter who you are. Like you could be his son, his dad, his missus, or ex-missus, you know what I mean? He will still, one minute he loves you, and then the next minute he's attacking you and you're everything under the sun he'll call you," unquote. She denied that an individual by the name of Ray Gibson had stolen Jason's beloved Statesman while he was in prison, instead claiming that Jason had instructed her to sell it to a wrecker's yard. She told the court that she hadn't been in an intimate relationship with Gibson after Jason's incarceration, and that she was unaware of any animosity between the two, and the coroner found her evidence did not advance the court's insight into Jason's death. Teresa Golding, who we mentioned briefly earlier with regard to Kelly, was an old friend of Jason's, having known him for 12 years at the time of his death. After his release from jail in March 2019, the pair caught up again, with Golding saying that she would often assist Jason with sourcing methamphetamine. She claimed the last time this had occurred was on the 20th of April, Easter Saturday. It was on her phone call with Jason, which Coroner Mackenzie suggests occurred in the early hours of Easter Sunday, that Golding stated she'd heard another man in the background possibly having an argument with Jason. The findings say that he was upset that he was unable to source methamphetamine, but doesn't elaborate whether this is in reference to Jason or the other individual that she hears, although my assumption is that it's Jason. Golding proffered the theory that Jason had been killed over a drug debt, but that was merely speculation. Golding also referenced a Facebook message received from Jason, and while at one point in the coronial findings it suggests this occurred on the day of his disappearance, at another point it states that from her evidence, it's unclear on which night over that Easter this had occurred. Surely they could find that out though. In any case, the message from Jason reportedly said that he was, quote, "going on a boot ride," unquote. Now, there's no explanation of what this means, or at least what Golding deemed it to be a reflection of, but as best I can work out, thanks to Google, it's a euphemism for someone being bashed, put in the boot of a vehicle, and taken far away before being dumped out, often with another beating. So the inference I take from this is that Jason would be the person going in the boot, insinuating he believes somebody's pretty upset with him. But what it doesn't mention is exactly what time Jason sent the message that day, if it was indeed on Easter Sunday. And again, this could be crucial for the same reasons as the early phone call on Easter morning. While we don't have the whole day's timeline, we do have snippets from witness testimony, CCTV, and phone records. So the obvious question would be, can we align that text message to any of the known windows throughout the day and who Jason was with at that time? While not conclusive, it could at least suggest a person or persons who Jason, for whatever reason, believed might be inclined to take him for a boot ride. Chantel Newbury is described in the findings as an associate of Jason's, although some reports online, including some of her own social media posts about Jason's death, suggest they had a much closer friendship. And I don't mean that to sound like I'm implying a romantic relationship, just that they at least appear to be closer than what I would deem an associate. But in any case, Newbury had lived with Jason for several months before his relationship with Rachel, and after his release in March 2019, their friendship resumed, usually by phone, as Newbury was living in Toowoomba. She recalled a telephone conversation, which she believed had taken place on the same weekend Jason went missing, describing to the court, quote, "A short time later he rang me, I think, or I rang him, I can't remember, and he said, straight up, he said, 'Tilly, I'm fucked. It's fucked. Everything's fucked.' And I said, 'Why don't you come to Toowoomba with me?' And he just said, 'Nah, I don't want to be a third wheel. I got to get shit sorted out here.' And I said, 'What's wrong?' And he said, 'I got to go. I'll call you back.' And he got off the phone. And that was the last time I spoke to him. And I didn't know at that point that he really meant something was wrong." Unquote. Newbury's final profit theory was that Jason had mistakenly overdosed on heroin given to him by a drug dealer and was placed in the sewer by that dealer to cover it up. but apparently had no evidence to support such a claim. She was, however, aware of Jason's heavy methamphetamine use and also knew his housemate, Kelly. Troy Peterson had been friends with Jason since 2016. When Jason began a relationship with Rachel, Peterson also became friendly with her, although upon Jason being incarcerated, they became even closer. It's not clear if this is implying a romantic relationship at some stage, but Peterson characterises Rachel as dishonest and says that he parted ways with her. It said that Peterson met Kelly when he moved into the 1033 Bride Street residence to live with him, but doesn't indicate when this was, and if it was in fact before or after Jason's death. Peterson admits to knowing what he calls the Wynnum crew, comprised of Shane Bear Johnson, Lee Lucas, and others. Peterson reportedly gave evidence of a Facebook post made by Jason, titled, "Let the Sparkler Burn Out." In the post, Jason talks about having lost everything, including his partner, his daughters, and his property. He was clearly down and, by inference, suicidal. Belinda Schwartz was a friend of Jason's, as well as the partner of the previously mentioned Lee Lucas. She was also a member of Lucas's friend group and knew Kelly. During the meeting at her house on Easter Saturday, herself, Jason, Lucas, Kelly, and another unnamed man were reportedly present. She recalled that at one point Jason had become agitated and that she had heard him say the words, "weak if you don't." But there's no further context for the statement. Schwartz couldn't suggest any reason why someone might want to harm Jason. After his own custodial release, Gregory Hines, who had been a fellow prison inmate of Jason's, came forward and provided investigators with an affidavit on the 7th of September 2021. While the two men had never shared a cell, they had been housed together in Unit D4 at Arthur Gorrie from the 10th of April 2018 to the 11th of March 2019. Hines proceeded to claim that he had asked Jason for a favour, tracking down 2 boxes containing 69 guns that he had inherited in 1992 from a deceased person in New South Wales. The men only communicated through coded letters, with Jason writing to another prisoner named Mickey G, assumed to be Michael Greenaway, that contained a coded message at the bottom of the letter which was directed towards Hines. This code was reportedly a series of numbers and letters, and Hines, would dispose of the message once he had read it. The last letter supposedly received by Hines was during the week of the 15th of April 2019, with Jason saying that the Roland Avenue address was a no-go, and he was meeting up with someone named Sarah O'Brien. It was Hines' claim that O'Brien was in fact either an active or former police officer with the New South Wales Police Force. It was Hines' belief that Jason had asked the wrong people the wrong questions regarding the guns and had been executed as a result. However, Hines was unable to identify Sarah O'Brien, stating it was an unnamed source that had told him about her and another corrupt officer. He claimed the guns in question had been inherited from the Major. Gosh, I hope this story's real. And that there was actually 3 boxes, which could be in different locations. At inquest, Hines stated that he had never told Jason that the boxes contained handguns, and described the two as simply acquaintances. He claimed to have paid Jason an initial sum of $500, and that he didn't know what he was going to do if Jason actually located the weapons, whether he would surrender them to authorities or sell them, but he claimed he had intended to compensate Jason with a 15% commission. If you're wondering how much mental bandwidth to set aside for considering Hines' narrative, keep in mind that Coroner Mackenzie concludes his comments on this witness by characterising his evidence as fanciful at best. Counsel assisting also provided the submission that the evidence of Mr. Hines was speculative, unsupported by the evidence in the case, was not probative, and fell within the context of profound psychiatric illness. Mr. Rawlings concurred. It's believed Shane Bear Johnson and Jason met for the first time around Thursday the 19th, the day before Good Friday. Both were friends with Brian Elwell, and all 3 men had reportedly used drugs together in this window. Johnson described Jason as a nice bloke and said they'd gotten along well in the short time they'd known each other. Jason was driving Johnson's car during this time, as seen in the 7-Eleven CCTV, due to Johnson not having a valid driver's license, and he admits to having paid Jason in drugs. Police attended the Wynnum 7-Eleven on the evening of Sunday the 21st of April 2019 at 7:58 p.m. in response to Johnson's earlier 000 call. They note him appearing jittery and describe him untying the ropes on the boot of his car and jolting back, seemingly afraid of what might come out of it. There is also indications that he may have been paranoid that something had been illegally planted in the car. The officers locate nothing within the vehicle, and it's reported that he's seen to remain at the 7-Eleven car park until 1:16 a.m. when two unidentified women arrive and drive his car to the Brisbane CBD. Johnson is next captured on CCTV footage at the Evolution Apartments on Tank Street at 1:49 a.m. I find this next statement in the coroner's findings confusing. Point 77 reads, quote, "Mr. Johnson is the last known associate to see Mr. Guise alive," unquote. But either there's something missing from the timeline we have, or that statement's incorrect, and it's actually Brian Elwell that is the last associate to see Jason alive, when Jason leaves his house at approximately 7:20 p.m. on Easter Sunday. But in any case, Coroner Mackenzie notes that statements taken from Thomas Birch, Michael Blackson, Sean Carroll, and Miss Trina Kingy all suggested that Johnson has knowledge regarding Jason's death that he has failed to disclose. Ultimately, I think it's safe to say that at least one, likely more, among Jason's group of associates knows what happened to him, or at least has a good suspicion. And whether it's fear or loyalty that keeps them quiet, the problem with each is that they have zero control over the outcomes either way. Having kept your mouth shut to date doesn't help you if the killer thinks you might squeal in the future. And in these circles, I imagine loyalty only stretches as far as someone's self-preservation. So what are the options? Well, you can keep hoping you don't piss off the wrong person, or that they don't become irrationally paranoid about what you know while in a drug-induced stupor. Or you could always come forward with what you know, walk away with $250K and escape the situation with your life, without having to constantly look over your shoulder. I don't know which one I'd choose. If you have any information about the death of Jason Guise, please call Crime Stoppers on 1-800-333-000. That's it for this one, kids. Part 2 should be up on your feed so you can jump straight over. If you're liking the show, you could do me a huge favour and take 2 seconds to leave a 5-star review wherever it is you listen. Next episode, we'll be discussing the different locations where Jason's body could have entered the sewer system, the 5 possible scenarios being considered for why Jason died, and we'll use the information we have to try and trace Jason's most likely movements that night. Socials are reward_offered. If you'd like to support the caffeine addiction required to cover these cases in such detail, you will find a Patreon link in the description. See you for part 2. Thanks for listening.